It's very common for someone to show up on our doorstep and say, I have 30 days of cash. That's where the early signs start to show. It's easy to see cash is tight. It's harder to see when there's starting to get cracks in the facade. Time never adds value to a deal. The longer a deal takes, the agreed upon price will go down so either the deal will lower in value, the buyer will find something as an excuse to lower value, or the deal will fall apart.
Time kills deals by all means. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of This Is M&A. My next guest has spent nearly a decade guiding middle market companies through mergers and acquisitions, as well as capital raises across industries like healthcare, business services, technology, consumer products, and manufacturing. He's known for helping clients navigate both healthy deals and distressed situations, including restructuring and bankruptcies at Cassel Salpeter Co, a boutique investment banking firm based in Miami. Earlier in his career, he worked in turnaround consulting and private equity, an experience that shaped his solution-driven approach to driving deals forward. Born and raised in Miami, he studied mathematics at MIT, played water polo, and even had stints with the Boston Celtics and ESPN during college. With that, everyone, please meet my guest, Phil Cassel.
How you doing, Stephen? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you. Really looking forward to diving into some of the topics that we're going to be jumping into. More specifically, a subject that every founder and CEO hopes they'll never have to face, but many eventually do, and that's distress. So what happens when the cash flow runs thin, or debt piles up, or the market just shifts against you? So we're going to talk about how do you protect value and keep optionality alive. Ultimately, what we hope to unpack in this very short episode is how do you recognize the early warning signs that your company might be heading for distress, and what should you do about it? The playbook for preserving value, right? When selling under pressure, are there lessons learned from distressed deals that can be applied to healthy sales and healthy transactions? And then lastly, but not least, the common mistakes founders make in distressed deals and how to avoid them. We have a ton to unpack here, so we're just going to jump right in. Phil, where do we even get started?
Yeah, well, we can certainly talk about this all day, so we'll try and keep it at a high level. There's no one right answer, but to name a few, I think, if customers are having issues making payments, there could be something going on in the broader industry or with those particular customers. Losing customers is never a good sign. That goes without saying. But if you're losing customers, why are you losing those customers? Are competitors stepping in? Are there problems with those customers where they're bowing out of the marketplace? Do you need to be investing more in your technology or in your people so you can compete with your competitors? You really dissect why you're losing those customers. Sometimes it comes down to a customer base that's not diversified, which is a tricky problem to have, especially in the lower middle market. It's hard to turn away revenue, and sometimes you grow organically through a handful of customers. So I would never advise clients to turn away good quality business at good margins, but where possible, or proactively seeking customers to diversify your customer base is a good approach to avoid customers conveying their problems onto you as a business owner. I think losing key personnel is another area where it's signs that there might be trouble. It's not always financial trouble. Sometimes it's cultural issues that then lead to financial trouble. So, you really have to try and attract and retain the best talent internally. And then on the supplier side, again, signs of the broader industry or, other problems. If suppliers don't feel like you're being a good partner to them, they might be shying away from you. So are you getting the best product? Are you getting timely answers? Are you paying your vendors on time? So these are more high level, less quantitative, more qualitative areas. But I think that's where the early signs start to show. It's easy to see cash is tight. It's harder to see when there's starting to get cracks in the facade.
Yeah, I've even been personally been involved where it wasn't even necessarily the market, right? Where the market was shifting. It was just poor decision making that led to leakage of revenue, right? Overspending, easy things to identify when going through some of those short-term bumps, I guess you could say. So, how do you separate short term bumps from true structural issues?
Well, I think a lot of the things you mentioned are easy to identify in retrospect. And so looking back, you can see that that investment didn't pay off. Um, but I think, budgeting and planning is a good way to keep yourself on task and understand where things are lining up against what you hope to achieve. So you can understand, is this a 1 week issue? Is this a 1 month issue? Is this a 1 quarter issue? Or is this something that could bring down my whole business? So I think in the planning, it helps you really understand the bigger picture, and then tracking results against planning. So when we're talking to businesses, one of the first things I ask for, in addition to financials, is management dashboards. What do you use as a business owner to manage your company? That could be reports you're getting on a daily basis or weekly basis or monthly basis, but what are you using to monitor the key results of your business? And what are those key results? Because they're different in every business.
Right. Yeah, I've consulted several businesses, and you'll be surprised how many business owners don't have that dashboard or are not in tune with the metrics and the KPIs for their business. And it's no wonder why they don't know how to grow or know how to scale, or might find them in a spot, which is a bit of a pickle, right? As
Well,
we're talking about.
it's funny because you have business owners that are very successful and they monitor cash coming in the door. And that's great when you're profitable. Um, but when the cash isn't coming as fast or you have a blip, you could dismiss that very early. But if you were tracking things on a more granular basis or paying attention to more of the details, sometimes you can identify issues sooner and mitigate those losses or distractions.
Right. One thing I just want to kind of go back to that you brought up is the diversification of customers, right? I have seen several companies die because they relied on 2 to 3 customers. Those folks that are in that position, what should they be thinking right now?
Yeah, look, again, it's hard because in certain industries, let's use a consumer product, for example. Costco might be a very large customer for you, and that might be a great customer for you. And it might be very hard to diversify, but thinking outside the box and thinking other areas you could go, to try and drum up new business. Sometimes it's just the customers you already have are growing faster than the other customers. So you might be growing the overall, and as a percent, you're still growing your customer concentration. But by growing that base, if you do have those blips or issues with customers, rising the tide of the overall through other customers can help you mitigate the exposure on those key customers.
Makes a lot of sense. If someone finds themselves in a position right now where they might be distressed, they might and be in kind of turnaround mode, what's one thing that you can give those folks that they should be thinking about when they first find themselves in that position?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. And I started my career at Alvarez Marsal doing turnaround and restructuring work. So I've lived through this as a consultant on the inside, but as an investment banker and often working with both healthy and distressed companies. But one of the common mistakes we see from distressed businesses is they don't move fast enough. It's very common for someone to show up on our doorstep and say, I have 30 days of cash. At that point, it is very, very difficult to preserve value and try and have a successful result. If you come to us ideally 6 months or at the very least 3 months in advance, um, that's a little more time, to assess the situation and react and preserve as much value as possible. Um, if you're tracking the business properly, you should see it well in advance of that. But that's the most common issue, is not reacting fast enough. So I think some things you can do to help preserve that value is do what you can to retain key members of the team. That might mean incentivizing them with bonuses. I know cash is hard to come by. Maybe it's incentivizing them with equity in the event you can get through the cycle, give them a piece of the upside. Let non-essential staff go. And that is something very, very difficult for business owners to do. But the sooner you let people go that are non-essential, the more money you'll have to retain other people. and the more jobs you'll preserve in the long run. So it might hurt in the short term, but cutting 10% of your staff, 20%, maybe more, might end up saving many jobs in the long run. Another area is making sure you prioritize not only your team members, but your key customers and your suppliers and your key suppliers. Even if that means coming out of pocket as a business owner, maybe you made a lot of money for several years, you might have to go into your personal savings in order to help with the cash flow of the business. But think about what makes your business valuable. Your business is valuable because of your team, your key contracts, which might mean both on the customer and supplier side. Without those things, if you start losing key customers and losing suppliers, when you go to market, you're not going to get the value you have built over the years. And then maybe a last resort, but something you need to be thinking about along the way is considering bankruptcy. Bankruptcy, it's a dirty word, and people that don't understand it, often think of it as I'm shutting down my business, but you can operate in bankruptcy and you could sell out of bankruptcy. And often it gives you time to take a breath. You don't have to pay all of your bills. It gives you a pause. And then you can get rid of certain agreements or contracts that are not core to your business and preserve others and run an orderly process to try and maximize value to pay off as much of your creditor obligations as possible, while moving others to the estate. But often it's the best case scenario for some of these situations to preserve jobs. And we could talk all day about bankruptcy. Happy to
That's
answer any questions there, but
that's a
but
topic in itself.
yes, absolutely.
I'm going to say I've had the privilege of inheriting an opportunity to turn a business around. And the reason I say that is you learn so much trial by fire. And it was a great opportunity to educate myself. And I could speak to what you described as act fast. Don't wait too long. You got to just jump in. You should have a cash flow model laid out. You should know your ins and your outs. You should know who your critical employees are. You should cut the ones that aren't critical because you're trying to retain the good folks and make sure that you can at least keep the business operational. I know from personal experience, what I've done is just exactly as you described. You take your vendors and you break them out. Who's critical, who's not? Who's going to get delayed payments? Who's going to get paid on time? Because those are your partners. You need your vendors, right? All of those are very important tips, and you'll be surprised how quick it comes up on you. And I think what it is the C-suite CEOs, what they're doing is they're like, well, maybe I can salvage it. Let me try all these different things before actually rolling up their sleeves and saying, no, we got to start cutting now. Because it doesn't just sneak up on them in the sense like they can't see it and forecast it far enough ahead. It's just they keep trying to be optimistic. Oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, we're going to do that. Instead of just saying, listen, if optimism works for me and it ends up working out, that great. But if it doesn't, I don't want to see myself backed up against the wall. Let's start making these cuts and these adjustments now.
Absolutely. Look, the conversation switches from EBITDA and profitability to cash and cash flow. And, you're right. You do get an MBA if you don't already have one through these processes, and you learn a ton, stretching that payable to make things work, absolutely. But, one thing you mentioned as the C-suite, not everyone is qualified if you've never been through these scenarios to address the proper, chain of command or chain order of operations to best preserve value. So I think it's important to bring in professionals where there's enough value and enough available cash. You look at banks when they're owed money will force their clients to bring in a financial advisor to help step in and run the show. And they come in all different shapes and sizes. It could be a one-man show to come in and help you with a 13-week cash flow. It could be a team of several people, depending on the size of the deal. But bringing in professionals, talking with folks like us on the prepping for sale, if that's the ultimate route, or even just talking through what that looks like, is important because not everyone's well-versed in, the playbook for addressing these situations.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen so many business owners leave it into the hands of their team and still stay disconnected. It blows my mind. It's like, wait, you're in this distressed position, but you still aren't rolling up your sleeves and getting involved and knowing you should know every aspect of your business. Or to your point, bring in a really solid team who's going to do that for you. But you don't lean in on your C-suite and just say, hey, C-suite, go fix that. you got to be involved. You got to be there. You got to be in the trenches at that point.
If you act fast, you can always undo some of those things. If you're stalling on a payment to a supplier, you can always make that payment when you feel comfortable, and get them caught up. If you let people go, you can possibly bring some of those people back if they haven't found another opportunity. But if you wait too long, you're going to have to get rid of more people, or you're going to lose that customer and not service the business. The value is just deteriorating if you don't act. And there's a lot to be learned on these distressed deals that can be applied to healthy deals. I think moving fast on a healthy deal is something that we as a firm like to do, because time never adds value to a deal. The longer a deal takes, either the agreed upon price will go down because something will happen, whether it's with a customer, with a supplier, with tariffs, with foreign exchange issues. You never know. Would the debt markets collapsed a few years ago and all private equity firms had no more debt overnight? So either the deal will lower in value, the buyer will find something as an excuse to lower value, or the deal will fall apart. Never, once you agree on a price, does a buyer say, hey, you just landed a new customer. We want to pay you more for the business. At least in my experience, I haven't found those opportunities. And I think spending the time up front so you can run through the process quickly, that means getting a quality of earnings and cleaning things up and mitigating any chance that they'll find things. Doing a quality of earnings and bringing a third-party accounting firm or consulting firm in to check your numbers, prep for a sale, allows you to find issues that a buyer will find, fill those potholes along the way, so you have as much of a smooth process as possible. It pays for itself on unlocking EBITDA, it pays for itself on net debt and working capital, but the fact that you can increase the chances of a successful transaction even by 5 or 10%, that alone to me is worth the money you spend on a quality of earnings. So if you can keep LOI to a closing on a healthy deal to 60 days, and this is industry dependent, you can't do that in every industry, but if you can keep it to 60 days instead of it dragging to 75 or 90 days, that's less time for issues to go wrong or a buyer to find something or create a problem where there's not. So we really lean in once the LOI is signed, and we're upfront about it with buyers before that LOI is signed. Hey, we're going to rush to the finish line. And that's not because anything's wrong. That's because we're trying to preserve value here, and it's in all of our best interest to get this deal done and focus on growing the business.
Yeah, it's something here at ShareVault that we really try to push out to the markets that we service is time kills deals. We've seen it happen over and over again just in the last 5 years, right? With the pandemic, how many deals were killed because of that? Where we're at today with the geopolitical and economic pressures and everything, seeing it again, right? Time kills deals by all means. And so let's talk about quality of earnings for a split second. Maybe if you could just elaborate, what is that for the audience, for the folks who don't know what that is? Because it used to be something only upper market used to do, or generally you saw it more upmarket. It's starting to come down to smaller deal sizes, and maybe you can explain why that is as well.
Yeah, and not only upmarket, but it was really more found on the buy side. So buyers were doing this, coming in, and what a quality of earnings is on the highest level is following the cash and make sure that what you see on the financials is what's happening in the bank accounts. But it also is a buildup of EBITDA and a stress test on adjustments. What's one-time issue? What's a recurring expense? What is an owner-related add back? So you can come up with a normalized level of EBITDA. And then also, and again, they come in different shapes and sizes, but if you really go in more depth, an analysis on net debt, because these deals are typically debt-free, cash-free. So anything you can move to working capital versus net debt is $1 in the owner's pocket. Working capital is something sellers often ignore and where buyers extract a lot of value on these deals. And if you can have a position on these things going into a deal, you're in a better position. So I think moving it to the sell side, now we get to draw the line in the sand and defend that position rather than getting a report from the buyer and trying to claw back these different positions. Now, we might be aggressive in certain areas. We might know that in an item that is happening every year, we might call 9 recurring, like if some businesses have a lot of litigation. And we might say that the litigation is a non-recurring item. And the buyer might dispute that and you might give that one up. But you're drawing the line in the sand where you have room to give back. But more importantly, you find issues that a buyer would find. It's the same professionals doing the buy side and the sell side. They know what they're looking for on the buy side. So if you can find an issue with the financials or find an issue with a customer or different things like that, or the payables or receivables, you can really clean things up before you even go to market. And then you're in a much better position. It streamlines the diligence process. The diligence on the financial side can take 30 days now instead of 60 days. You're organized, and they can liaise with the Q of E provider on the buy side as well. So then you have an accountant talking to accountant or consultant talking to a consultant, and it really helps things move forward in a more expeditious manner.
I can tell you a buyer is going, a lot of sellers like, whoa, hold on, we got an LOI in place for X dollars. I can promise you it's rare from my experience that that's the dollar amount that you end up sticking with. And the reason being is it's because both parties are working to either boost it up or maintain it or to bring it down, right? And so all of those things you get faulted for, it's like, check, okay, there's X deducted from your valuation, check, right? So being as buttoned up as you mentioned early on, right out the gate, send that right signal. It's kind of like prepping for a board meeting, right? You go into a board meeting, if you have the answers at the tip of your tongue, guess what? Less people are going deeper into the weeds.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that if you find an issue, you look for more issues as a buyer. If you ask a question, we deliver it on a silver platter and it answers your question, that's the end of that line of questioning. If we come at you with information that's disorganized, you find some issue with that data or that information, you're going to ask 5 more questions, and then 5 more questions, and then time drags and the price drops. So anything you can do to streamline the process, having a data room ready to go, all those things really help make sure we're preserving value and keeping the process moving. It's also a second job for an owner. You're running a business and you're going through a sale process. Yes, we can mitigate some of that, but I don't have access to the information. It comes from you and your team. And the last thing you want your business to do is suffer during a process, because there goes the value. You need to hit your budget or your projections during the process. On a distressed deal, we're trying to keep it to 30 to 60 days. So we're really rushing. Now, some of that risk is based on the price that a buyer is willing to pay, but it's really, move fast where possible. And anything you can do on the front end to enable that is key.
What's the first step a company should actually take to protect value as best they can when they're in a distressed situation, potentially trying to sell?
Yeah, I think some of the things I've touched on earlier, but moving quickly is priority 1A. Getting rid of some people, keeping other people, getting the opinions from your leadership on areas that, hey, what's the most important aspect of your team that we need to keep around? Don't make unilateral decisions, but really try and make sure you have the right people around you. That extends to professionals, as I mentioned. So don't wait an extra week to call around to your network to get to the right people. Often on that initial call before you even hire someone, you'll get a nugget of advice where you can act to preserve some value or decide where best to spend your time or where best to spend your money, right? You might want to hire a financial advisor or accountant to come in. A lot of professionals will hire their regular accountant to come in that's not well equipped to handle a distress situation because they think, they know the business. But there's a very tried and true playbook for these situations. And it's not cheap, but it really is proven to maximize value. Start stretching those payables. Every few days helps. And start calling your customers that are late in paying you, and try and do it in a manner that doesn't set off red flags. You want to keep this internal as much as possible. But, if a supplier is slow to pay, hey, we realize you haven't paid us in 65 days. Our terms are 60 days. Can you make sure we're on the next cycle? And then think about communication. Sometimes your best advocate or your best source of wiggle room might be your top customer. They might need you they, to stick around. And if you go out of business, they're in trouble. So, but that's where some of these professionals know how to communicate that properly to, your network, your customers, your suppliers, to be able to extract that extra value or cash flow. And again, sometimes it's just timing. You might be waiting for that big customer payment to come in. And so stretching your vendors, I need another few days. But if you ask for something and you agree to terms, you better start meeting those terms, because then they're not going to give you the next thing you ask for, if you don't follow through. And then incentivizing your team, I talked about earlier, it's difficult to retain talent depending on the market cycles and how in demand your people are to the broader industry. But when people see a sinking ship, they got to protect themselves first. So lining up your lieutenants, making sure they know that you're going to do whatever you can to take care of them. Hopefully you were taking care of them over the last few years or decades, that they're with you through thick and thin. But, making sure that, hey, if we get to the other side of this, I'm going to give you a sale bonus, or I'm going to give you an equity stake if the goal is not to sell the business, or I'm going to make sure the buyer understands that how key you are to the business. So they ensure you stick around and properly incentivize you for further growth once the business is stabilized. But having those conversations, you don't want word to get out to your organization, hey, we're missing payments, we're losing customers. If you're letting go of 10% of your workforce, you might have to have an all hands call with your team.
Yeah, I think communication is so critical in this type of environment, making sure that you're transparent as possible. But through that transparency, even with your employees, with your executives and your vendors, believe it or not, they're going to surface ideas that maybe you just didn't think of, right? I know when I was in that position, one of the things we did was, well, first off, let me just say this. Again, I led from the trenches. I was picking up that phone, calling past 90 days, past 120 days, 30 days, doing whatever we can to collect what's already owed to you and do whatever you can to get that in the door. But number two was payment frequency, right? Trying to get some customers that you have to renew early, or getting those customers to pay differently. Maybe you have different payment terms, net 30, net 60, net 90, pay one payment this year, next payment next year. Call those customers. A lot of your customers are willing to help out. Give them an incentive to do so. It'll help bring cash in sooner than later. Because if you don't show that you're dying from the vine when you're trying to go out to sell, you're going to be in such a better position than if you're dying by the vine. They're like, well, wait, you need my money. You need us more than we need you, right? Which really devalues the business.
And in talking to those customers, you might find a customer or supplier is the right buyer for your business. And you might already have a strategic relationship with them. But when you're running an expedited sale process, a buyer is often someone you know, and someone you've worked with before. And so you might say, hey, we're having a little trouble in this situation, but I think, if we work together here, maybe there's an opportunity. I was thinking about retiring soon anyway, whatever it might be. There's different ways to position this. But would you have interest in, either investing or acquiring? And it could be a two-step process. I'm not going away anytime soon. I'll do this for another 5 years, but I want to take some chips off the table, whatever it might be. And then you might get a cash infusion with that too, or you might be able to get rid of some overlapping expenses that could really, be accretive to the bottom line.
So Phil, this has all been great. Let's talk about you for a second here. How did you get into, you said Alvarez Marsal, you're working on some restructuring and such, distressed, whatnot. Like, how did you get into that? Why did you get into this field? What's kind of the why behind you in this business?
So I kind of stumbled upon it. I was working for the Celtics while I was in college doing stats analysis. And my boss there was a guy named Daryl Morey, who, big sports fans would know. He's now running the 76ers, and he's like the Billy Bean of basketball. I was coming out of school deciding, do I stay in sports or do I get a real job? And I ultimately decided to get a real job and thought I could make my way back to sports eventually, versus if sports don't work out, then I don't have a foundation to build upon in the business world that I could leverage. So Daryl actually started his career in consulting. So that got me thinking, operations apply all across the board in sports, whether that's with a team or with a league or just the broader sports media landscape. So I started thinking in terms of consulting. I had a relationship with someone at Alvarez Marsal back in Miami and went to school in Boston, spent a few winters up there, and always wanted to make my way back to Miami. It happened a little faster than I anticipated, and the timing couldn't have been any better. This was 2007.
Okay.
Financial crisis was right
Yeah.
around the
In the
corner,
thick.
and I end up at the firm that landed Lehman Brothers. I didn't work on Lehman Brothers, but it went from people within the industry knowing Alvarez and Marsal to everyone within the financial industry more broadly knowing who Alvarez and Marsal was. And it was a great experience. I enjoyed moving fast. I enjoyed following the cash and working with management teams, working with colleagues, and really throwing in the fire. So 22, going into a business and helping them decide what bills to pay, which people to keep. Really wild stuff. Certainly learning a lot from the team around me. Ultimately, very difficult lifestyle, as you can imagine, traveling 5 to 7 days a week. Ended up working in private equity for a couple of years in Miami. And then I joined my father in investment banking about 14 years ago. He had started the firm shortly after I started my private equity role. And I was watching him build a firm very similar to the predecessor firm he had built, and decided if I was going to join, getting in on the ground floor was the right time to do it. And became a partner in the firm several years ago. We built to 15 people. And, historically, the firm is really centered around healthy M&A, some capital raising, and advisory work like fairness opinions, solvency opinions, valuation work, a lot for public companies and for private equity firms and their portfolio companies. On the M&A, it's mostly for founders. We had done a little bit of distressed M&A and bankruptcy work prior to me joining the firm. But when I joined the firm with my past experience in turnaround work, it was really an area I gravitated towards. We get to run through a deal in as little as 30 days, but maybe more on average 60 to 90 days. I understand the bankruptcy process, which is key, and I know what the other professionals around the table are doing. So we really leaned into that area, and it's become a meaningful part of what we do. We still work with healthy businesses, and that's still kind of the bread and butter of the firm. But working with distressed businesses, both in and out of court, has become, an area that, we excel at. And frankly, I enjoy doing. I think it adds a lot of value. It saves jobs, helping the rich folks get richer. Hopefully they turn around and do good in the world, but helping preserve jobs really has a meaningful impact on the people around us.
I know the turnaround and the restructuring and the distress side is what really I enjoyed about our conversation, just given some of the background I have as well. How do people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you after this episode?
Yeah, we're pretty easy to find. Hopefully, if you search Miami Investment Bank, we show up somewhere near the top. But Cassel Salpeter.com, that's Cassel, Salpeter, Salpeter.com. Phil Cassel, you'll find my phone number there. But my email is pcassel, Pcassel, at cs-ib.com. That's pcassel at cs-ib.com.
I'm sure listeners are going to love our conversation. I really appreciate you jumping on the show. There's so much we didn't unpack, so I look forward to hopefully having you back on the podcast. But yeah, thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was really enjoyable. And we can spend all day on any of these topics that we briefly touched on, and happy to do so with you or any of your listeners.
Definitely. Thank you. So that's a wrap on another episode of This Is M&A. See you on the next episode. Until then, stay sharp and stay deal ready.
If this episode sharpened your thinking, share it, post your take, follow the show, or drop a quick review and bring it into your next deal. We'll be back with more real talk from people who've been in the room when it counted. The views and opinions expressed on This Is M&A are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect the views of any company or organization mentioned. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, financial, or investment advice. Always consult a qualified professional before making business decisions.